Okay. So the kind of democracy that Athens still had at this time was a limited democracy, and it meant that only certain people could participate a certain amount. So the only people who could participate were citizens, and this meant that women were excluded, and also merchants and foreigners were excluded as well. So it wasn't, even though you lived in the city, you weren't allowed to participate in Athenian democracy. Their slaves were excluded from voting and having a voice. But, in relative terms, between them and other city-states at the time, they were, pretty democratic. Okay, so let's talk about sort of the culture and life in Athens. So the lives of children and women in Athens could not have been more different from the lives of children and women in Sparta. Women were important in Athens for pretty much religion only. So women's participation in religious ceremonies in Athens were considered essential to the city's well-being, and it was considered bad luck to not have a woman witness a religious ceremony. And women were managers of the home, so they bossed their servants around, they did their own chores, they cared for their children, prepared food. So, they were supposed to, excuse me, I'm sleepy. They were supposed to live their secluded lives in their house and were rarely seen in public. And if a woman was seen in public, especially without a chaperone, it meant that most of the time you were poor. So you were either going to your job or you had a job outdoors, and that meant that you were not well off. Okay, so youth in Athens. Girls never really had any formal schooling, so they were taught in the homes, mostly by their mothers, and boys only went to school if their parents could afford it. The boys received military training somewhat, but definitely not to the extent that Spartan boys did. And Athens encouraged their boys to explore many areas of knowledge. So they didn't want them to just be involved in philosophy. They wanted them to also be involved in maths and science and reading and rhetoric and all of these different areas. They wanted them to be well-rounded citizens. Okay, so you know how different cities in North Carolina, like Raleigh thinks they're the best, Greenville thinks they're the best, we know the beach is the best. The fighting between these city-states, because of how different lives they led to, a lot of fighting, a lot of divisions among these city-states, even though they were all considered Greek. So, some things that kind of unified the cities were their religion. So they were all polytheistic, which means that they believe in many gods. And of course, the religion of the Greeks, the Greek mythology that we hear about, that's their religion. Those stories are kind of the Bible, to what the Bible is to Christians, or what the Quran is to Muslims. So, sort of a general overview. You saw a little video the other day, but their gods lived on Mount Olympus, which is in northern Greece. You should know that because of your map quiz. And so the head god was Zeus. So the chief god was Zeus. He presided over the affairs of other gods and humans. Some of the most important gods and goddesses are Ares, Aphrodite, and Athena. So Ares is the god of war, Aphrodite is the goddess of love, and Athena is the goddess of wisdom. And the Greeks and Athens and Spartans alike, they honored gods with temples and festivals. So a lot of them had specific festivals for specific gods at different times of the year. And they consulted oracles to discover the will of the gods. So, from our study of China, we know that oracle bones could kind of tell the future, and that's what an oracle is. So an oracle kind of speaks for gods. And I might try to find a video about the Oracle of Delphi to show you, because that's interesting. So what would happen is these priests and priestesses who were thought to be oracles could, the Athenians and Spartans and other Greeks thought that the gods spoke through these oracles. So people like leaders in the state, and just, regular run-of-the-mill people, they would go to these oracles, ask them questions, thinking that they were asking their questions to the gods, and the gods were replying back through these oracles. I'll try to find a little video on it to give you a little bit more information. And then another thing that unified Athens and Sparta were the common culture. So they shared the same language, they had the same heroes, so like the Olympic heroes, same festivals because they had the same religion, same gods, and then the Olympics. So the Olympics were something that sort of unified Athens and Sparta, because they wanted to see good athletes perform. It was important where the athletes were from, but it was more important that the athletes were good at what they did. So I might try to find a little bit of video on the Olympics too. Alright.